All right, so you're prepping a message on Genesis 1:26 to 27. And, that whole humans are special bit, well, let's be real, it's been done a lot.
Yep, been there, preach that.
So we thought, why not bring in some fresh voices? We got a whole stack of sermons here from other pastors, all tackling this passage, but each with their own unique spin.
It's like a sneak peek into how your colleagues are approaching this familiar text and finding new ways to connect with their congregations.
Exactly, like a backstage pass to their creative process.
Precisely. And that's what makes this deep dive so valuable, right? It's not about copying what they did.
Right.
It's about seeing how they're using storytelling, maybe some cultural references they've pulled in.
Oh, yeah, I saw a lot of that.
Even a touch of humor sometimes, all to make these verses really come alive.
Absolutely. And one thing that really struck me, just going through these sermons, was the variety of themes. I mean, it goes way beyond, like you were saying, that sort of basic made in God's image idea.
Oh, for sure.
We've got sermons here about humans as divine gardeners, cultivating shalom. There's one on singleness as a way to reflect God's image, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
And even one that dives deep into how Genesis, by saying that all humans bear God's image, would have just completely flipped the ancient world on its head.
That's the one from Central Community Church, right? That was a fascinating point. They really highlighted how back then, in those ancient Near Eastern cultures, it was only the kings who were thought to reflect the divine.
It's like they were the chosen ones, right?
Exactly. So for Genesis to come along and say, nope, every single person, every man and woman bears God's image.
It's radical.
It was a radical statement, totally different from the prevailing worldview.
Genesis just drops this truth bomb right from the start.
Yeah, for sure.
And, speaking of bombshells, some of the analogies these pastors are using, seriously creative stuff.
Oh, yeah, they got pretty wild.
I mean, we're talking using the movie 300 to illustrate how kings, they literally saw themselves as gods. And then contrasting that with the Genesis message that everyone, not just kings, are made in God's image.
That's smart. That's a great way to make a point, Tap into something people already know.
Right. It's not just about being flashy or entertaining. It's about using these familiar things
Right.
to connect with people where they are and actually get them thinking about this deep truth.
Exactly.
So we're seeing pastors using pop culture in this really cool way to make things, I don't know, more accessible, maybe add some depth.
For sure.
What other kinds of, creative approaches are we seeing in these sermons?
Well, we're also seeing a lot of pastors who are really good at weaving in historical and cultural insights.
Oh, interesting.
For example, there's this sermon from Beulah Baptist Church, and they really went deep into the early church's views on abortion. And they were citing sources like the Didache. I don't know if you've come across that.
I have, yeah. It's one of those early Christian writings. Right?
Yeah, it dates back to the 1st century. And they also reference a lot of the early church fathers. Okay. So they really showed how these ideas about the sanctity of life have, some really deep historical roots.
So it's not just a modern-day debate.
Exactly. It's something Christians have been grappling with for centuries.
That makes sense.
And, that historical context, it can really make these ancient words come alive in a new way for today's audience.
Like building that bridge, right?
Exactly. It's connecting the past to the present.
Yeah.
And another sermon, this one from New Covenant House, they talked about ancient kings and how they would, put statues up all over their territory.
Oh, right, to show everyone who's boss.
Exactly, to represent their rule. And they connected that practice to humanity's, dominion mandate from Genesis.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it gave a whole different layer to think about.
It makes those verses feel so much more, I don't know, tangible.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's not just this abstract concept.
Right.
It's connected to real history. And speaking of connecting to modern stuff, I noticed that the Flame Church brought in the Evangelical Alliance's perspective on how secular worldviews can lead to, identity confusion.
Yeah, it's a timely issue, for sure.
Definitely.
Especially in today's world. It's really interesting to see how, all these pastors are taking this ancient text and making it relevant to today's world. We talked about that historical context.
Right.
But they're also, pulling in stuff from, secular sources sometimes to kind of shed light on Genesis 1:26 to 27.
Yeah, totally. Like the Flame Church, they used a cosmetics brand slogan, because you're worth it. It made me think, okay, where are we finding our worth? Are we finding it in God or in, fleeting things?
Yeah, that one surprised me a little.
Me too, honestly.
Using a slogan like that, it's risky. It could come across as kind of trivializing a deep theological concept,
Yeah,
but they actually pulled it off. It really did make you stop and think. It sparked a deeper reflection.
it did. And they weren't the only ones who used these like unexpected connections.
Mm.
Central Community Church, they actually brought in a business concept, Marty Neumeyer's brand gap.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
And they were talking about how Christians, we need to consider how well we're representing God. Are we living up to the brand?
That's a great way to put it. I love that analogy. It's like being made in God's image. It's not just about who we are on the inside. It's also about how we reflect that image in everything we do.
Totally. Our actions, our interactions, dot everything. That was honestly one of my favorite takeaways.
Mine too.
Oh, and another sermon that used a really creative illustration was from Light Christian Center. They used, get this, the periodic table of elements.
The periodic table. Wow, that's creative.
Right.
But does that, I don't know, maybe oversimplify things a bit? Like, is it really helpful to compare spiritual qualities to chemical elements? Or is it just a catchy gimmick?
I think it could go either way, honestly. It really depends on how it's presented,
Right.
and whether it connects with the congregation. Speaking of unique perspectives, though, there was one sermon that really stood out to me. Toyin Akunyang's sermon on singleness.
Oh, yeah, that one was really thought-provoking.
It was.
It's so different from how we usually interpret Genesis 1:26 to 27, which tends to focus on marriage and family. But she was presenting singleness as a gift.
A valid way, a valuable way even to reflect God's image.
Exactly. Not just like a waiting room for marriage,
Right?
but a unique opportunity to really focus on your relationship with God without some of the, I don't know, the divided interests that can come with marriage.
I love that reframing. And didn't she use an analogy from a Nollywood movie? I thought that was so cool.
Yeah. She talked about this seemingly perfect couple, right? And everything looks amazing from the outside.
Instagram perfect, yeah.
Exactly. But then the relationship just falls apart and all these hidden struggles are revealed.
Away.
And it just highlighted the point that even people who appear to have it all together.
They might be dealing with stuff we don't see.
Exactly.
That's so true. So much for those picture-perfect Instagram couples, right?
Brett.
But beyond the cultural references and all the cool analogies, these sermons, they also got into some, serious theological meat.
For sure.
I mean, we're talking about Imago Dei, God sees it love, that responsibility we have as humans to care for creation.
Yeah.
Big stuff.
Absolutely. And they didn't shy away from the tough topics either.
Yeah.
Beulah Baptist Church, for example, they connected Genesis 1:26 to 27 to the whole issue of abortion.
Right.
That's such a complex and sensitive issue, obviously.
Not going.
And they traced the early church's stance on the sanctity of life. Back to the Didache, the church fathers, really grounding their perspective in that historical context.
Yeah, I appreciated that. They weren't just giving these easy answers. They were inviting people to think.
Exactly.
It's clear that these pastors, they're not just preaching, they're facilitating conversations.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so valuable for pastors and Bible study leaders. It's a chance to see how your colleagues are approaching this passage.
Yeah.
With creativity, with depth, and with a real desire to connect with their people. It's like we've given you this backstage pass to their sermon prep, showing you a bunch of different techniques to breathe new life into these familiar verses.
It's pretty inspiring, honestly, to see all these different approaches. They're taking these well-known verses and making them feel so fresh, so relevant. Gives me hope that we can, move past those Sunday school platitudes.
Oh, absolutely.
And really connect with people on a deeper level.
Yeah. And you don't have to copy these approaches exactly.
Right.
Think of them as jumping off points, springboards for your own creativity.
Yeah.
What unique element can you bring to Genesis 1:26 to 27, right? Something that'll resonate with your specific congregation, your people.
That's the key, isn't it? It's all about finding those unexpected connections, things that make people, sit up and pay attention.
Exactly.
Maybe it's a personal story, something that relates to, being made in God's image. Or maybe it's a current event that you can connect to human dignity.
Yeah. Or you could even think about incorporating music or arts or poetry.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, think outside the box. The goal is to engage your audience on all those different levels.
Yeah.
Help them see this familiar passage with new eyes.
That's so good. I think what I'm taking away from all of this is that it's okay to get creative.
For sure.
It's okay to think outside the box. And honestly, most importantly, it's about being authentic. It's about letting your own passion for these verses, for this truth, shine through.
Well said. Because when you can do that, when you present a familiar passage in a way that's fresh, that's relevant,
Yeah,
it creates a space for a whole new level of engagement.
it does.
It invites people to wrestle with these ancient truths, but in a way that's personal, in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah, and who knows, they might even leave that sermon feeling inspired to live out their own calling,
Yeah.
as image bearers, to live it out in a way that's more intentional, more authentic.
That's the goal.
Right.
That's what we want to see,
Huh.
to help people see themselves the way God sees them, as unique, as valuable, as individuals, each bearing his image.
So there you have it, our deep dive into some creative, insightful approaches to Genesis 1:26 to 27.
We hope this has given you some food for thought as you prepare your next sermon or Bible study.
Remember, you have a unique voice, a unique perspective to offer.
Don't be afraid to experiment, to try new things. Find what works for you, for your people.
Because at the end of the day, it's not just about delivering a sermon.
Right.
It's about creating a space where people can encounter God's truth
Yes.
in a powerful way, in a way that can truly transform their lives.